And welcome everybody to another episode of King Arthur and the Lady of the Lake. My name is Michael Laurie and I'm joined as usual by my beautiful co-host Helen Glover and her earrings. Everybody pay attention to what Helen's wearing today. Helen, would you like to tell us what these earrings are this week?
These are my Pagoni official earrings by my friend. So yeah, get on the Pagoni website. Beautiful stuff, all handmade.
Oh, isn't that amazing? And we're talking about, and there's no, the Pagani don't sponsor us either. This is just, I know it sounds that way, doesn't it?
Yeah, this is just my friend who she actually was diagnosed with really severe breast cancer 10 years ago, and she came out of it by creating beautiful jewelry.
Oh, isn't that beautiful?
Now she has an incredible business.
Yeah, cool.
She's inspirational.
Well, we're not going to do this every week. Absolutely not. But pay attention to Helen's earrings. We've brought them to everybody's attention before, and we probably will again because they're just like another presence in the room, aren't they?
Yeah, they're art for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So today on this episode, we're talking about the dark side of the brotherhood. Last week we spoke about the dark side of the sisterhood, and you heard Helen's experience of all of that. And today we're going to talk about the dark side of the brotherhood. And so this will be my thing to speak into, obviously. And I'm sure you'll have questions for me along the way, Helen. But if I were to begin this and speak into the dark side of the brotherhood, I might speak into ego and competitiveness, because they're really some of the most fundamental of masculine traits that can really determine a man's experience around other men. And when I talk about competition, it's not so much competition as we might see on a sports field. It's more competition around comparison. And that's a really big thing for, I think, people in general. But if we're talking about the brotherhood and the dark side of the brotherhood, this comparison really speaks into things like, and I'll speak into some of the things, because men in our society are judged primarily by their level of success. And when I talk about success, that's going to be around material possessions, the acquisition of material possessions, financial wealth, and their societal status as well, what kind of job they have, and their position, their perceived position in society, and also in their jobs that they hold as well. And so we see this comparison and competitiveness a lot when you see a line, when you turn up at the, to play golf or the football or school or whatever it might be, and you see a line of cars, and then then you see all the men going back to their cars and what kind of car they step into. And that can be a very subconscious thing for all of us. So for instance, if your friends have a European car and you're driving a Ford or a Commodore, for instance, then you're going to feel something about that, and other men may judge unconsciously about our cars and the clothes we wear and the kind of person that we've chosen to be with, our partner. And there's all this unconscious comparison that happens from a competitive point of view with men. And it's all pretty much superficial. We don't look beyond the surface. It's all superficial. And so we look at car, wife or partner, we look at the clothes that we wear, the house we live in, where we live, the job that we have, the amount of money that we have, and then we judge ourselves and others based on that. And I've had this experience for years in different, and also our level of attractiveness, that's no different to women, right? Our level of attractiveness and how that's perceived by other men. Body shape and body physique is a big one too, because we know that, or we think that women find muscles, arms, shoulders, and abs attractive. And so then if we're in a group of men and we know that one of those men has all of that stuff and we don't, then we're going to feel consciously and unconsciously insecure in some ways around that man. But it's all largely superficial.
And It's funny because I interviewed a guy from New York on my podcast, and I spoke to him about the success thing because I think that's a really key area for men.
Yeah, it really is.
And he said, he said, sometimes I'll go to my friend's house and it's so amazing. And he said, you walk out and you think, I'm going to kill myself, man. That house was amazing. And he said, like, it's such a big deal. People are getting themselves into so much trouble to try and have this house.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and he said, and it is literally about what everybody else is doing and your level of status in that space.
Mhm.
The house, the car, like you were saying. So I really,
Totally, totally.
yeah, I really did.
And there's even this real deep sense of not just self-comparison, but also like, what is my wife or partner going to think of me when she now witnesses this guy who has all this stuff and who is this, he's attractive, he's got the chiseled jaw, he's got the nice car, he's got the money, the house, the abs, the et cetera, and I don't have this stuff. I wonder what my wife's going to think of me now,
Mm,
right? And then all this internal insecurity comes up. And then what we do unconsciously, what men do unconsciously, is that then within ourselves and also verbally, we will seek to minimize and marginalize that man who has all this stuff. And we won't talk as nicely or think as nicely of him as what we may have before, especially if we see something in our partner which may look like attraction
mm,
towards this
mm,
other guy.
That's really interesting.
It
Yeah.
really is, and
I
I've had
hadn't thought
discussions with
about that part of it, about the man being insecure around his wife, but I've actually seen that and I can
yeah,
understand it. Yeah.
a man being insecure about another man in the presence of his wife.
Mm.
So it could be just two couples catching up for dinner, right? And they're friends, but there could be something there
So
that
what does that look like, Michael? What would that interchange look like when a man's threatened by another man? What kind of behaviors?
the behaviors that you would see are traditionally it would be the chest out, right? So somehow we want to try and make ourselves look physically bigger to try and almost make the other person look smaller from a physical perspective. There might be it might be reflected in the way that we choose to dress, which is very different to how we normally choose to dress. So if we know we're going somewhere in the company of other people, then we might choose to overdress to almost overpower the other person and make ourselves look um, superficially better dressed, more successful from a superficial perspective, if you like. In conversation, it comes out in conversation too. I've seen this. I've actually seen this interchange around a dinner table once, where there was some of us couples, and I knew that one of the other women found one of the other men who wasn't her husband attractive, right? And it was kind of a bit of a joke in amongst the group. However, we all knew about it and it wasn't really a joke. And so what would happen is this woman's husband would make a real effort to engage the other guy who his wife found attractive in conversation, but not conversation as in I'm really interested and curious about having a conversation with you, conversation to the point of intentionally trying to make the other guy look unintelligent and unattractive and yeah, and it goes to the point of almost trying to minimize that other person so that somehow you can somehow affect other people's perception of him, and maybe then he'll be found as less attractive as what he was before than what he was before.
Mm,
So this is the dark side of the brotherhood, where men feel this is part of it, where men feel threatened by other men in certain settings, especially when their partner is there.
mm,
And there's this territorial. We spoke about this last week with the dark side of the sisterhood, where there's this territorial thing happening. It's a really instinctual primal thing, where it's like that's my woman, and you don't get to have any part of her,
mm, mm,
even her attention, um, anything.
mm,
And so I'm going to do anything that I have to do in order to make myself look better and feel better so that my wife's attention is always on me.
mm, mm. Yeah, and there's a level to which that becomes really oppressive and really quite dangerous within the marriage, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Mm,
Absolutely. Because then it becomes, then in private, that person will come up in conversation even more, consciously or unconsciously, trying to minimize them in our partner's eyes.
mm, mm,
And I can't I can't say I've ever done that consciously, but I've known of other men to do it.
mm,
But
mm,
I can say that I have felt um, that I felt insecure maybe around other men in the past. So if I haven't had the sort of body shape or physique that I've wanted, and then somebody in our circle has, then yes, absolutely. That's a very normal thing for most men, right? Where because all of us men want the abs and we want the shoulders and we want the arms and we want the chiseled jaw and the perfect hair and and all of that stuff, and we can't always have it, or maybe that's not a priority in life. But then here's an example for you. I'll give you an example from my own personal life. So I remember a relationship that I was in prior to my current relationship, and I'm married now. And so here's what happened. We were out. We were out at I think it was a party or a get together or something. And and I didn't have the physique that I wanted then, right? I wasn't overweight, but I didn't have the musculature, the physique that I wanted back then. And then we went to this party or this dinner party, and there was this guy there that did have the physique that I wanted. And all the ladies were just swooning, right? And he was a good looking guy. There's no doubt about it. He was a good looking guy, right? He's the kind of guy that might make other men question their sexuality. That's how good looking he was, right? And and I remember watching my partner interacting with him, and there was an obvious attraction, right? And I remember feeling really insecure about it. And then on the way home, I remember reacting from that experience. And it's like, you spent a lot of time with so and so. Did you enjoy your conversation?
yeah. Mm,
And And then she said, "Oh, yeah, he's a nice guy and whatever." It actually wasn't anything to her, right? She was just having a conversation with a guy who I perceived in a certain way, and she could recognize he was an attractive guy, but she wasn't necessarily attracted to him. So big difference between the two. But the way I perceived it was very different. And so
mm,
what I proceeded to do in the hour car ride on the way home, this was a few years ago now, was 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 find ways of making him less attractive in my mind than
mm,
what he actually was. Well, he doesn't have a partner, he doesn't have kids, he doesn't have responsibilities. So yeah, of course he can spend all his time in the gym. And because it's just him and he's got this job, of course he can afford a personal trainer. So that's why he looks the way that he does. It's not him, it's because of his personal trainer and his dietitian and his yeah, well, his dietitian, right? The people that give him the meal plan, and he's got someone to cook his food. And of course it's easy. He's got no responsibilities. And so you systematically, as you were saying last week, systematically break this person down in your own mind and also amongst your peers to make yourself feel better.
mm,
And
mm,
so I remember doing this, and it's a real dark side as we talk about this is the subject
mm,
this week, dark side of the brotherhood. It's like, why can't I feel like I can just relax into the normality of my humanness?
mm, mm,
Right? And this is what it is. And it's a man thing, it's a woman thing, it's a human thing. And if
mm,
we can start to acknowledge the fact that we don't have to be perfect and everyone has their own story. And from a male perspective, yes, there are guys out there with the abs and the arms and the shoulders and the chiseled jaw and the perfect hair. But do I want to spend that much time in the gym? Do I want to spend that much time and consciousness being really concerned about what I'm eating and when,
mm, mm.
timing my meals,
And
and
also, is it important? Like, what's
is
important?
it something that's of value to
Yeah,
me?
yeah. Mm,
Yeah. And
mm,
then we have to trust that other people around us can recognize the fact that that person, whilst they've got all that stuff, there's always sacrifices to that, isn't there?
mm,
There's
mm.
always
Oh,
sacrifices.
yes. Mm.
There's
I mean,
always sacrifices.
a lot of, like, obviously, being a divorce coach, working with men who literally did that whole push to get the house and push to get the
Yep.
car and push to get the body. And so they've got the male version of have it all. And then their wives are completely kind of cut off from them.
Yep.
They're totally disengaged. Their children don't really have relationships with them. And they turn around going, well, here you go. We've got to like 45, 50. We've got enough money now. We've got a great house, great car. And there's nothing left in the relationship.
And there's nothing left.
And
There's
then when
nothing
that
left.
relationship breaks, the man actually feels the loss of so much more than he ever thought possible, and didn't realize that he'd been concentrating on all the wrong stuff.
Yep. You see this a lot in men. They It starts off as this need and desire and want to provide for our families, and that's a really honorable thing and noble thing to do. And then as we get further and further along that path, in my book, Forging Excalibur, I talk about this, where we start to climb the we start to climb Mount Success, and we
Mm,
get about halfway up Mount Success, and we start to realize that the rest of the journey is a lot more treacherous and requires both of our hands to climb the rest of the way to get to that version of success at the top of Mount Success. And so then we have to make a choice between success and our relationships, which is that which we truly value, right? And most men on this quest will release their relationships and continue on the path um, up Mount Success towards success, imagining, thinking, feeling, whatever, that their family will be there when they get there. When in fact, what's usually happened is exactly what you just talked about. They're so focused on being this person that they think society expects of them to be, and they think that their partner wants them to be, which is this ripped, muscular, you know, guy with money and great looks, etc., etc. And so they're reaching for that, but when they get there, they find that along the way they've lost everything they truly value. And what the irony of that is that maybe their partner or their wife has found comfort, love, affection, whatever, in the arms of another man that doesn't have all the stuff.
yeah. Yeah.
He doesn't have all
Mm,
the stuff, but what he does have, or what he does do really well, is he's engaged, he's attentive, he's present, he's all of that stuff that you aren't anymore,
mm,
right? And so it's a real it's a when we talk about the dark side of the brotherhood, it's this real competitiveness from a place of comparison, and we compare ourselves to others, but also what we think society expects of us, and what we unconsciously think our partners expect of us without actually having any good quality communication around it,
mm, mm,
right? And so this is something that's really lacking in men and relationships in general, is the ability to have good quality conversations at the very beginning. It's like, this is where I want to go. Do I have your support to get there? Or can we negotiate something that works for you and works for me, so
mm,
that we can create something consciously together over the next 40 or 50 years that we're both happy with, right?
mm.
Whereas instead, we just go on these unconscious journeys in life, and then end up with teenage kids who are ready to go off and find their own place in the world. And we then suffer from empty nest syndrome, where the
Mhm.
kids have left and they're pursuing their own dreams and their own goals. And we're like, well, there's nothing here anymore. There's
Yeah.
nothing between us anymore.
Mm,
What are we supposed to do? And then somehow we have to reconnect. And what's happened is that we've lost ourselves and that connection along the way, because we've become such different people from who we were 20 or 30 years ago. And now it's like, who are we? And now it becomes a journey of rediscovering not only ourselves, but each other, and getting to know this new person that suddenly emerged after 30 years or 20 years, because we haven't been attentive and engaged and present in the relationship. So we've both, as individuals, grown into different versions of ourselves that we don't recognize anymore.
yeah. And I mean, I've heard a beautiful saying about that, which is like, I've been married 5 times to the same woman. And it's
Yeah.
because you kind of constantly growing and coming back together. But I was going to ask you, as far as the shadow side of men's emotions, because that's something that's of great interest to me. And I think it would be interesting to people who are listening. about that conversation about who's tough, who's weak, who's this, who's that, purely based on conversation, and men not being able to reach out because of the narrative around
Mm, mm.
men's emotions. What's the dark side of emotional kind of intelligence, emotional, the capacity to be vulnerable? Can you talk about
Yeah,
that?
I think I have a really good saying around that. There's a big difference between vulnerability and weakness. And so one of the things that really haunts men is this need to not be weak. They don't have to necessarily be strong, but the need not to be weak and not to be seen as weak. And so when we start talking about vulnerability and we use that word vulnerability for men, it's like, oh, I have to be all soft and mushy and weak, and I've got to express my emotions and maybe even cry. And what will my mates think? What will people think? And deeper than that, will my wife respect me? Will my partner respect me if I show weakness? Right. So there's a big difference between weakness and vulnerability. And so some of the narrative around that is that men, and we've heard this stuff so much, men can't cry, shouldn't cry. It's not cool to show your emotions. You just have to get on with it. Right. And so this is the dark side of it, because we can pretend to get on with it. We can pretend that we're okay. But what we're really doing is we're adding to the darkness within us that keeps on growing and growing and growing as we suppress and repress even more. And so then what happens is the more we repress, the more that slow cooker gets hotter and hotter and hotter. And one day we will implode.
Mm, mm,
And then we see that in demonstrations of aggression and violence in men, because women seem to be very good at seeking out other women to have good quality conversations with when they're struggling emotionally or mentally with something in their lives. Whereas men seek to suppress so as not to appear weak. Um, and then we're told to be vulnerable. And what we see is we see two camps of this in masculinity in men. We see men who step into vulnerability and then don't leave, and that becomes weak because they stay there for such a long period of time. And then we see other men, which are the alpha male types, which just are stoic and suppress everything. And they
mm.
repress everything. And they've got this air of, well, the whole alpha male thing, which is like, nothing bothers me, I'm bulletproof, when they know deep down inside they're actually not. And so men are stuck in this, between this rock and a hard place, between, do I go over there with these men who are just crying and hugging each other all the time, or do I go over there to this guy who's just rock solid, apparently?
So I have to butt in and ask you, what's the shadow between men in those spaces?
Can you expand on that question a little bit?
So what's the thoughts about how does each man view each other in that space? How does this man
Yeah,
view
right.
this man?
Okay. So the alpha male, for instance, might look at the other guys and go, "You're just pathetic. Okay, you're pathetic and weak, and you're just a little girl." That's how they will view them, right? And the other guys over there will look at the alpha male and go, "Well, you're just disconnected from your feelings." Yep.
Mm,
Which,
mm,
and they're both right in some on some level, they're both right.
mm,
And so what I've spent the last 15 years doing is trying to find a really good balance between the two,
mm,
right? Because there are times when we do have to just be strong. There are times when we just got to pick our shit up and keep walking, right? But there are also times when we can stop, consolidate, allow ourselves to be vulnerable, allow ourselves to express within the container that we create for ourselves in order to do that, and even share with our partner and share with our close circle of friends and family and whatever. Understanding that we can create that container for ourselves, but then we have to allow ourselves to move on from that as well. And so that's the difference between vulnerability and weakness. And this is where the shadow comes into it, and the dark side of the brotherhood, because the propensity is to go in one of these other two camps, right? And that's the shadow, that's the darkness. The darkness can be either the real stoic alpha male bulletproof thing, persona, or the other one, which is really very weak.
mm,
It's really very weak. And so, and they judge each other. And then when you've got people like me who kind of sits somewhere and floats somewhere in the middle of the two, it's a very lonely place to be, because most men haven't found that. And you spoke into this last week, that it can be quite isolating. You feel quite lonely and disconnected from other women. And so that's how I feel sometimes too, very disconnected from other men, because not all men seek to find that place somewhere in between, because you don't feel like you fit in anywhere.
mm, mm, mm. There is a real, um, within the shadow of the masculine and feminine, there is that real kind of isolation, isn't there? And there's almost, I know for me that there's been a push pull of having a sense of belonging, and looking for that kind of where do I belong here, and kind of trying to
Yeah,
seek that out. And I suppose the more you seek it, the more you discover the nooks and crannies and the dark sides of it, because you're in there really looking around as to where you're going to be able to live your best life, I suppose.
exactly. And both of those two, expressions of the masculine, let's just say, that I explained before, they're both in some level of avoidance. you
Mm,
know the ones over on the left, and it's interesting that I talk about the left and the right, because from a political perspective, that's exactly where these two expressions of masculinity live. The real feminized version of masculinity lives over on the left, and the real masculine alpha male lives over on the right, and they're both in some stages of avoidance. you know the guy on the right's avoiding all of his feelings altogether, and the guys on the left are avoiding their intrinsic masculinity and the strength that comes with that, right? And so the guys like me and many other people that I hang around with, we are somewhere in the middle between the two. And it's not it's not a traditional place for men to be. It just
mm,
isn't. And so the darkness there is the resistance to both, and a seeking of something in between that we know isn't widely accepted in society.
mm, mm.
Yeah.
I was going to ask as well, um, what do you think about, the bullying personality of the alpha male, and also how they bully, younger boys or people in the workplace? So there's
Mm.
this kind of toughen up, buttercup, and the whole, cynicism and sarcasm, and
Yeah.
kind of, oh, you got to be able to laugh at yourself, mate. We're just taking the piss. But actually, it's really quite damaging. And a lot of younger boys and younger men coming through,
Yeah.
um, it can affect who they are
Mm.
in their masculinity
Totally.
forever.
Yep. We see in bullies, and we know this in school, in young boys, the bullies are usually always, almost always, the most insecure people,
Mm,
the ones that have probably been bullied, the ones that who feel somehow inadequate, right? And they find feelings of adequacy and feelings of security in breaking down other people, and that's what happens in the schoolyard. And with those boys grow into the real stoic, not even stoic, but the real adult bullies. They grow into those adult bullies, the ones in the workplace that say exactly the things that you do, the ones that maneuver and degrade and suppress others, right?
mm,
The ones that will step on your head to get to the next rung on the hierarchy, the hierarchy of the corporate ladder. They're the real unconscious. You know what, Helen? They're the guys that step into their Porsche at the end of the day and go home to an empty home,
mm,
right? And sit on the couch and drink, feeling depressed. It's either that, or they'll go home to their family and their kids don't want anything to do with them, and their wife is just elsewhere, right? And the relationship is disconnected, um, and they're still sitting on the couch on their own with
mm,
a scotch at the end of the night.
And there's an
right?
aggression about that kind of guy as well that is quite difficult to approach.
Yep.
And that is very much speaks to the defense of that position, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Mm,
And he feels it within himself because, full transparency, that used to be me. That used to be me, right? Not the Porsche, but the BMW, just different, right? And that used to be me. I'd step into my BMW at the end of the day and I'd be on my way home, dreading going home, knowing that I wasn't going to be met with love, for instance, um, and sitting on the couch and drinking beer and eating nachos and chips, right? Watching TV because there wasn't Netflix back then, and and just being depressed about life. But then showing up the next day and being that real alpha male leader in the workplace.
mm,
Like I had it all together when I really didn't. Yeah.
And that's so similar, isn't it, to what I was saying about, Dark Side of the Sisterhood, about that kind of keeping up appearances, that you've got it all
Yeah.
together. And what's it like around fathers, the fatherhood thing, fathers with kids?
I think it's a lot different. I think I've seen mothers with kids and there's a competitiveness with that. And and a lot of women like to know that their child is progressing faster, is more intelligent, and better in whatever way than other people's children. I don't
Everybody's mum's kid is a genius, Michael. I don't know what you're talking
Absolutely,
about.
absolutely. But I've got to be honest and say I haven't observed that in men. I don't. Here's what I've observed in men. When men catch up with other men with their children, it's like, all right, kids, off you go and play, right? And they stand around, whether it's around the bar, this is going to be so stereotypical, whether it's around the barbecue or at the footy field or whatever it might be. There's no sense of competitiveness around, not when the kids are young. When the kids get older and when they get into mid to late teenage years, then you start to see some of, oh, my son's in the footy team, right? My son got into the footy team, or my son's going to this university, or he got a scholarship, or he's doing this, or he's something else. And then it becomes, there's more of a competitive aspect to it. But
Mm,
when kids are young, I haven't noticed that.
that's interesting, yeah, because it is the
'Cause that's
competitiveness with
achievement.
mums is actually, in that younger year. It's like they're a reflection of me, and I have to, show them the manners and the this and the that, and I have to show that I discipline my children well and that they're well behaved, and
Yeah.
like there's this real reflection on who you are. And yeah, that's really interesting that's the case. I can see that totally, because
Because when
it's achievement based.
it really is achievement based. It
Mm,
really is. Because then we start to bring in, what does success mean for my child? What does it mean for my child to be successful in life? And of course, then we project all our unconscious shit onto our children, and what we want to live vicariously through them. It's like, now I can push my child to be successful where I wasn't. I want everything for him or her that I never had. And what that really is, that language is, I feel like I haven't achieved anything in my life that I wanted to. So you're going to damn well achieve it so that I can live through your achievements and your success and not feel like a dismal failure myself. Because
mm,
at least you've done some of the things that I didn't, and you're a reflection of me. So people will look at your success and that'll reflect well on me.
mm, mm. Yeah, yeah.
And that's when men start to step into more competitiveness with other men around their children. Um, I saw it. I saw it as I was growing up in later teenage years, as as the kids that I grew up with in school. I remember one particular kid. His name was, I'll never forget his name, Scott Richardson. His name was Scott Richardson. I'm sure his name is still Scott Richardson, and he was just the golden child of the school, right? Absolutely. And my mother would always say when when my brother and I were kids, "Oh, look at Scott. He's getting all these good marks and he's doing well." And, and she did say once, look at Scott, why don't you be his friend? Why can't you go be, right? Be his friend. Go on, let's come on. We're going to go over to Scott's place today. You and Scott can play, and and I know my mother was like, maybe you'll pick up some good habits from him. Maybe you'll pick up his bit of intelligence. And he went on and he did very well in life. So he, at 21 or 22, he he was a professor of philosophy, I think, and he went on and he's now a lecturer at Harvard University. So he's done so well for himself. But I remember my dad never got involved in any of that stuff until I got to about 16 or 17. Right. And then it was time to make choices, life choices around
Yeah.
what we were going to do with life and university and year 12 marks and all that sort of stuff. And then he got more interested in where my life was headed. Not that he wasn't interested before, but now he got more interested.
Mm.
And now he started to notice other kids around me, my age, and what they were doing and how well they were doing and where they were headed. And then he took more of an interest in where my life was headed.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's so interesting, isn't it? Yeah. So there is some similarities really around, what's happening kind of under wraps in men and in women too, just maybe at different stages and to different degrees and for different outcomes maybe. Um, for men, the self-worth is based around the success and the money. And for women, I think success is based around kind of holding it all and
Yeah.
having everything, all the ducks lined up and being beautiful as well.
Yep.
And so it's very much that. So it's interesting, isn't it? Yeah. What
I
do
think
you
there's that.
think?
I think there's that self-image piece for both men and women.
Mm, mm,
Absolutely, I really
yeah.
do. And a lot of that is based on society's expectations. A lot of it is based on our own stuff as well, whatever beliefs we had growing up as a child. Um, and when you say same challenges, I think yes, same challenges, different age groups. So I
Yes.
think what happens is that the challenge for women is between probably birth and up until about 13 to 15. And I think then there's a transitional period where both people, both the mother and the father start to, yeah, I think there's a transitional period. And then when we get into 16, 17, 18 and older, that's where it's more of the masculine success, achievement driven stuff.
Mm, mm. Yeah, yeah. Bells and whistles, shiny objects.
Bells and whistles, shiny object, achievement, accolades, success, money, cars, job,
Girls.
et cetera. Yeah.
And isn't that funny how that whole thing of like, the shiny and the men looking for the girl to have on their arm fuels then the woman trying to look a certain way to be the one that would be chosen by the guy who
Yeah,
has the car and the money and see how
exactly.
this really kind of plays into itself. And yeah.
It's a cyclical thing, I think, and it
Mm.
happens through life at different stages of life. So when we start to summarize the dark side of the sisterhood and the dark side of the brotherhood, speaking of dark sides, I've gone dark because I forgot to turn my light on. Anyway,
You look like you're about to start singing some Bohemian Rhapsody there.
oh yeah, I won't inflict my singing voice on anyone.
That
I
would be the
promise.
dark side of Michael Lauria.
It'll be everyone's dark side then. um,
So
yeah,
what do
so
you think you could say to kind of wrap up? Like, I know that I did a bit of a wrap up about, maybe how we can show up and what maybe we could do. What do you
yeah,
think um, men can do to kind of change how this looks?
I think one of the biggest things that men can choose to do is to not feel like they have to be over there or over there. There's something really awesome in the middle. And the thing that's really awesome in the middle is the ability to be able to be strong, have a sense of responsibility, feel empowered and purposeful as an individual, but also feel like it's okay to actually express how you feel and what you're thinking. As long as we learn how to do so in embodied ways. And what I mean by embodied ways, that means we talk about the shadow so much in our shows, Helen, and what embodiment actually means is integrating your shadow aspects and understanding that there are inadequacies and there are weaknesses in amongst all of that, and accepting the imperfections and being okay with the imperfections, and understanding that you don't have to be all things to all people, nor do you have to be all things even to yourself in each moment, because um, we can choose to flow sometimes in and out of perceived perfection, understanding that even within that, there are imperfections, and abs don't make the man.
That's
Yeah.
right. And Carl Jung really speaks into that as well, about unless you can really look at the shadow and actually absorb it and integrate that into your personality, that you do have the capacity for evil,
We
then
all do.
you can't actually be self-realized, can you?
No, you can't.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
can never achieve those levels of self-actualization, which is really living a life of purpose, heading towards or working towards the best version of yourself possible and your full potential, until you start to integrate all aspects of your psyche, and that includes your shadow. Yep.
And a lot of those traits, um, when we really embody the dark and the light, then a lot of the traits that are seen as the dark parts of us, actually, we need to excel. We need the
We
strength that
certainly
the
do.
darkness gives us to really kind of be persistent and to move forward and to have that strength.
Yep.
So yeah, so it is really funny, that kind of the dark and the light and that place in the middle. So
Exactly. And it's okay. Like, there are times in life when I am the alpha male, and there are times in life when I'm over the other side as well. But either when I spend time in either one of those places, it is for such brief periods of time for a specific purpose, right? It is never, I never get stuck. And I think this is where you find the balance. You can choose to flow through this in a real conscious way. And that's a practice. It's a practice. Yeah.
mm, love it. As always, a great wrap up, Michael. That was really interesting. Thanks so much for talking about that.
That's all right, Helen. I enjoyed that, actually. That was good. And I enjoyed last week, the dark side of the sisterhood too.
Mm. It's interesting, isn't it? Kind of having the platform to really go into these subjects, and funnily enough, I was quite nervous about it, but then after I spoke about it, I just felt so comfortable in saying that is how it looks,
Yeah.
you know, and
Yep.
there's nothing wrong with that.
That's
So,
right.
mm,
And
mm,
it's quite natural to feel inadequate, insecure, and pathetic sometimes. It's
mm,
actually quite natural. And
mm,
so, what we try to do is avoid that. And that's the shadow of all of this. That's really the shadow of the sisterhood and the brotherhood, is in the avoidance of the fact that we are actually sometimes actually just inadequate, actually just incompetent, actually just insecure, right? And that's
mm,
because and that's because we're imperfect.
mm.
And if we
Another thing that's come up just now in my mind is, it's funny that the dark side will look so different on whatever your kind of normal propensity is. So, whatever your lens is for
Mm,
men who are more watery and more emotional, they'll see the dark side as the alpha male. It'll be something that they're so worried about becoming, or
that
they
will be their
can't
shadow.
connect to. And whereas for the alpha, it'll be like, I don't want to be one of them guys, where, so it's interesting that our lens as well means that we actually view it in a completely different way.
Totally. And there's shadow in both of them, isn't there? What
Absolutely.
we what we avoid is contained within our shadow. It's as
Mm,
simple as that. And so it should be a clear indication to both of these camps of men that they have not integrated their shadow. Both of them haven't. Right.
mm.
So there's work to be done.
Always,
There
always, and it all
really
starts with us.
It really does. It really does. And that's the beauty. And it's in our control, and
Yeah.
it's in our power to integrate the shadow and find those places that we need to go to, find those rabbit holes that we need to really start to delve into, to begin to integrate and embody ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool,
Another
Helen.
good one.
As
Okay.
usual.
See you next week, Michael.
See you, Helen.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks for listening and watching again.
Bye.
Bye.